Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Gurpreet, who will be co-presenting this session with me, and we hope to take you through some of the lessons that we learned over 8 years of developing a free and open source software in healthcare domain for low resource settings. My name is Anshuman. I'm one of the maintainers of Bahmni, and Gurpreet is our community lead and also part of the product management team. So Bahmni today stands as one of the most popular open source software, and it's not just an EMR, it's a hospital information system, and it helps hospitals or clinics to cater to essential functions like laboratory, imaging, billing, pharmacy, uh, other operational components as well. It started in 2012, and today, in about 8-9 years, it is now implemented across 50 countries, over 500 plus implementations. And mind you that these are information that we know. We do not have the complete picture of where all Bahmni has been implemented across the globe in what numbers. Not just an open source, it is also designed as an open system for interoperability across own systems, beyond, along with the ecosystem. It is also driven by an open community where each and every decision in terms of the product, evolution, design, governance happen through an open community process. Today, it is one of the most recognized softwares in many parts of Asia and Africa. Some of the largest humanitarian healthcare services organizations now use Bahmni, and only recently it was recognized as a digital public good by UNDPGA. So today, Bahmni stands in as a feature-rich, diverse, extremely configurable system applicable to different usage needs, from a single doctor clinic to an advanced super specialty hospital, from simple patient management tracking to complex flow sheets. I remember that somebody who had visited one of the implementations at JSS remarked that there's such level of integration and automation is only dreamt of in our institute, which happens to be one of the topmost oncology specialty in the country. So this is just a snapshot of the impact the Bahmni has caused. I want to stress that this is hugely undercounted, underreported. For example, Bangladesh has close to 60 implementations now, from district hospital to tertiary care hospitals. And the population served can be anywhere between 5 to 10 million or beyond. Starting from a single hospital in rural Chhattisgarh to now all over the world. Also note the map that primarily it is being used in Africa and Asia, because the product's target has always been low resource environment. More on that later. Now, surveying in some of the most demanding needs in low resource environments, for example, in Cambodia, Bahmni is actually used in a lake clinic with a completely localized configuration. For examples, what you see on the screen using in the Khmer language. Now, this is all started from here in a village called Ganiari, which is just outside Bilaspur district in Chhattisgarh state, run by this iconic organization called Jan Sastu Sahayog, or JSS. These are stories of inspiration, and there are about 8 or 9 doctors who 21 years back moved away from their high-paying jobs in AIIMS and settled in rural Vilaspur, and to serve the population who were in need of quality healthcare services. They asked us some of the most pertinent questions. Why is software so expensive? Because such organizations would rather use a 10 lakhs to buy medications than spend in drafting a few screens or building a few reports. They made us realize that people in small places do not have small problems, and hence no suboptimal or dumbed down solutions can be used in such environments. We traveled there way back in 2012 along with our then chairman Roy, and in the screen you can see Dr. Yogesh Jain, Dr. Sushil, Nurse Kuti, along with some of the members of the Bahmni product. Now, JSS is an organization which always looks at from the experience of the patient and the practitioner. They didn't just want to digitize. Digitization was not their main agenda. They wanted to leverage the power of technology to serve the population, to make it easier for them in terms of operations and efficiency. They are today using the data they collect to even push the boundaries for advocacy and population studies. Take, for example, another Adivasi hospital in Gudlur in the Nilgiris. This is a 50-bed hospital run by the Adivasis, and the system has been implemented by them. Sure, we did help them out, with configurations, but much of the implementation has been done by them in a trial and error means. Or think about the NTV, which started in 2016 and now it's actually across 25 countries. After 50 years, 2 drugs came out for treatment of TB, and there was no drugs in between, no new drugs that came in between. And this NTB consortium all around the globe started this clinical study and trials to figure out the efficacy and safety and effectiveness of these drugs. And eventually, after years of study, they came out with a report to WHO in terms of the effectiveness of these drugs. And WHO is now figuring out means of scaling this, through government ministries of health. So today, Bahmni has been used in countrywide deployments. The entire country of Lesotho uses Bahmni at their district level hospitals. To Bangladesh, Nepal is currently under evaluation in Bihar, India. From general hospitals to advanced reconstructed surgery hospitals to programs like HIV, TB, burns, typical mother-child care systems. Bahmni has been used in diverse contextual needs. There is oncology module, which is in cards, as well as we are soon going live with integration with the National Digital Health Mission of India. To take this forward in terms of the lessons learned, Gurpreet would take us through.
Thanks, Anshu. So given the context that Anshuman has already set about where all Bahmni today is getting used, I think it will be good to try and understand some of the constraints, some of the characteristics of what does a low resource environment mean, right? So when we look at these places where Bahmni is today being used, as an example, Anshu mentioned the Lake Clinic Cambodia, the photos of which now you see on the left, right? And Bahmni is being used here in taken in a boat on a laptop to the particular clinic, which means what would be some of the characteristics we would see? We would see that there would be electricity issues, internet issues. There is a chance that most of the hardware that is being used is predated. It could be that the number of patients that you see in a particular facility would be much more than what usually you would see in a developed environment. And there would also be potentially less tech capability available on the ground. There would be risks around security because of lack of understanding. We would have to ensure that the hardware, things like Android, for instance, is being used. And there is also a significant danger of viruses, malwares in the system, laptop based or in-prem deployments. And these, if you see, characteristically are very different from what we think of when we are looking at enterprise based deployments, which are things like on the cloud, at scale, doing nodes. Whereas this is another world which is actually in many cases harder than what the enterprise world and engineers in the enterprise world would end up encountering. Just for background, I think it's important to also quickly understand the architecture of Bahmni. So we sort of put up a very simplistic diagram. One of the things that we realized is that we had to ensure that we do not reinvent the wheel. And for that reason, Bahmni has been built by threading together multiple other open source products in that particular space. And then we built a user experience on top of it and connected them together. So, for instance, we're using OpenMRS as the backend for the EMR. It has a very strong clinical data model, runs in Java, Tomcat, and the database is MySQL. Similarly, we are using OpenERP, which is now called Odoo, for the billing, stock management functionalities. We are using OpenLS for the lab. Yeah, the Odoo is Python, lab is again Java, and then we are using BCM4G for X-ray and radiology integration. And then there is an AngularJS/React.js layer on top that has been built completely, which is configurable, doesn't require too much coding to be able to do these for the EMR piece. Later, we connected all of these with with Atom Feed and used a protocol called Simple Feed, so that when you add a patient or register a patient on the OpenMRS end, that patient becomes a customer on Odoo, becomes a patient on the lab piece. But overall, if you look at the ecosystem is Java, Python, MySQL DB, Postgres DB. There is Angular React running on Apache web server. So it's a relatively straightforward, simplistic architecture, reusing various blocks and then connecting them together for the hospital end-to-end hospital system. We also have a Bahmni Connect app for remote data collection through Android to be used in remote clinics where they do not have internet connectivity. You can use Bahmni Connect, capture data, and then push it whenever you have access, say at the end of the day or the end of the week, to Bahmni to sync the records. So given the context of poor internet connectivity, you would see that Bahmni gets deployed in various options. Someone would use it in laptop, someone might deploy it on a desktop computer, it would be deployed in-prem, could be deployed on a private data center, and in some cases on the cloud in those places where they have good internet connectivity. Although usually we have seen more of in-prem deployments given the nature of the challenges. And therefore, we also have to support multiple techs, whether we're using Vagrant, whether we're using Docker, AMI images, Ansible for direct installation, and so on. Now, one of the important lessons we learned over time is that as softwares evolve, there is also an entropy that occurs along with it. Right now, Bahmni is now reached over 1 million lines of code, and that is actually a pretty big, sizable chunk of code base. And when we started in 2013 building Bahmni, AngularJS was the new kid in block. And by the end of this year, AngularJS will be no longer in support. People have moved over, AngularJS is in a way gone. And it's not just with Angular, it happens in general with technologies. CentOS is going to undergo a movement where a community is moving likely over to Rocky Linux. Earlier, Vagrant used to be very popular until Docker came in and solved so many problems for development as well as for deployment that Docker became the default choice. So I think one of the important lessons that we've really learned here is that products have a long shelf life and software within them continues to evolve and die. And we have to ensure that we build softwares in a manner that we are not too coupled with a particular framework, which means can we architect with looser couplings? Can we, for instance, reduce the dependence on frameworks and instead try to use more of Pojos, which was one of the, I would say, mistakes we did, where we kind of connected more strongly onto a framework and didn't leverage Pojo enough. For instance, maybe we stuck more closely to AngularJS, and we could have chosen to keep our front end modules separate into their own code repositories. Recently, we've learned our lesson, and the appointment scheduling module has its own code repo. It's been written in React, and it works well with the existing AngularJS code base. Similarly, we in the initial years tried to design our own design system, our own, sort of the way the look and feel would look. And I feel like we could have stayed away a bit from that, reused existing design systems, and moved forward much faster so that we have less of software, less of frameworks to manage ourselves. Also, if you look at security and privacy, we are talking about situations and places where people are not tech savvy. Many times, people would actually write the username and password and put it on a sticker in front of the computer, so that when the next person came into the pharmacy, he or she could use the same, credentials. And this causes problems, right? A lot of problems because you are no longer able to control who is accessing what data. You may not be aware, but in many countries in Africa, albinos are under persecution because it is believed that by witchcraft and other such, folks, they believe that albino blood and albino bones will help you become stronger, and therefore a lot of albinos get persecuted. Similarly, homophobia is a problem across geographies. Based on your ethnicity, there could be problem. And this data earlier, which was sitting in paper records, now is like fitting into a mini USB, which means it is easy to search, and it puts a lot of people at risk if this data gets falls into the wrong people's hand. So Bahmni and a lot of implementations of Bahmni have had to put in certain, features and certain checks to make sure that data stays secure. As an example, two-factor authentication using SMS had to be brought in so that people don't share passwords. Even though SMS is not considered as secure as an MFA option, but MFA means you need to have expensive devices, which are not possible in such locations, but SMS is easily available, much more widespread. So SMS is a good, let's say, intermediate solution that promises some level of security without sacrificing user experience. Similarly, the audit log feature of Bahmni ensures that even if you view someone's records, it would get logged that X person has viewed this person's records, just to ensure that people, even if they have access to certain data, do not go and see it just because they feel they want to. And that can act as a way of ensuring things stay away. Threat modeling, ensuring that trust boundaries are correct, having your system set up with scripts so that things can be locked down. These have all been important learnings for us and for the implementers that take Bahmni, and we still have a lot more that we would like to do here. Another learning that is very important is the product mindset itself, right? And also moving away to some degree from project mode thinking. What this really means is that it's easy to fund for a specific project. People are like, oh, let's just fund for, let's say, teleconsultation feature. Let's fund for, say, an HIV program rollout feature. Let's fund for just an OT feature, which in many companies would be called feature teams. The problem that occurs with feature teams is that this team is short lived. They do not have necessarily the full time to understand the context of the product, the things that can be done, and where is the product headed. And because of this narrow focus of getting this feature out of the door, tactical decisions end up trumping strategic direction. And that causes a lot of problems over time, which is not visible right now. So for instance, if you're building a teleconsultation module and you decide that, hey, we will do, emailing or SMSing, and you integrate with some SMS service, later down the line, you might realize that there was already a module written for Bahmni that could have done the SMSing. But instead of leveraging something that exists, we rebuilt it because it was a short story that could be done in 2, 3 days, and you didn't know the full context. Also, for tech for good environments, we want our clients and our customers to be sustainable, which means the product thinking will help in a manner that whatever gets built by others feeds back into the product. And there isn't one client or a few organizations that are, in a way, stuck with software in its management and its maintenance. So, in a way, I feel like the learning really here is it's important to start thinking product first. Think of it as a platform. Think of it as a core offering where the domain is well modeled. And then there are extensions that you can write on top. And these extensions could be written by the community, maintained by community, extended on top of it, so that your core product is managed carefully and extensions allow for different use cases to be considered. I'd highly recommend reading Shriram Narayanan's post on Martin Fowler, and he's an ex-thought worker on product thinking over project thinking. It's really eye-opening. One of the things that actually helped Bahmni a lot in our early years is that we as a team partnered and worked with grassroots organizations. And Anshuman has already mentioned earlier organizations like JSS and Ashwini in Gundur, and also then Hemal Kasa, which is Lok Biradri Prakalp Search. All of these organizations are patient first organizations. Every time we would suggest a feature, their first worry would be, how does this affect the patient? Oh, will this increase the wait time for the patient? And those are things that actually helped ensure that Bahmni is designed patient first for low resource settings. We actually sat in the lab at JSS and ensured that the lab assistant and the lab person and the lab technician said, this is how we want it and it should work for us. If it worked for them, then it's good. And these are all photos that you can see, for instance, from JSS of lab technicians using Bahmni here, or taking a photo and storing the prescription and the doctor notes against the record and making it easy for people on the ground to do this. Our teams worked on site. This is in Search, Gadchiroli. Mihir here is sitting there. All of our team were in there, looking at what is the requirement, looking at what we can do better to integrate, better to connect Bahmni, roll it out, get feedback, and then deploy closer to the ground. This is another example of where the team is sitting in the lab there at Gadchiroli, working over the period of 3 weeks on the requirements of migrating existing patient data from their Excel sheets into Bahmni before they can go live, including doing things like Unicode conversions to make sure that the data and the existing patient names are all correctly formatted. The other thing that really, I think, helped us a lot is having a backing of a caring and a competent organization like Thoughtworks, which has a significant expertise in the tech for good and global health space. I'll let Anshu talk a bit now about what is Thoughtworks' existing expertise in global health, since he has spent a significant time, almost over a decade, in this space, to tell us what that has actually a role, how that has played a role in forming Bahmni.
As we have explained, Bahmni was born out of a social call, right? This was not done as a corporate project, which meant like whom we partnered, which Gurpreet has explained, and who's sponsoring, plays a huge, like important factors. And we are thankful in that case that it was Thoughtworks which had substantial experience in working in global health informatics, right from community health to building national level health information exchange. Now, one of the big difference like, even for Thoughtworks was this to be able to work on the ground. We didn't build it in sitting in offices. We built it like, in the villages, working, staying in dormitories, working along with actual practitioners. So it has helped us as well. But I do think the sponsorship of Thoughtworks and the past experience of Thoughtworks, specifically dealing with open source, like, software in health informatics space, has helped us a huge bit. The other aspect that I want to talk about is also about configurability over without coding or without customization, say so. Think about JSS, finding somebody, a system administrator, who would take regular backups, who would systematically shut down a system, who can do typical maintenance like, oh, the printer wire has come disconnected. That itself is tough. Where are you going to find like competent, resourceful developers to go and work over there? So we aimed Bahmni to be implemented by people who could say, follow an instructions, modify like few configuration file, JSONs at the max, so that they can now suit Bahmni to a local context. And we believe that is one of the reasons that Bahmni has like also succeeded in such a short time, because lots of people were able to follow our wiki, our documentation, implement it in their usage context. For example, two doctors, I'm talking about two doctors without technical knowledge, actually followed our wiki and implemented Bahmni into two small clinics in rural Karnataka. Or like a hospital in Uttarakhand, small hospital in Uttarakhand, going live over 3-4 days with minimal setup, sure, but like with just somebody flying over there, helping them out with certain configurations. Now, this would not be possible if we were to do with lots of coding. The another aspect I want to talk about is sustainability. Now, open source products often struggle with sustainability aspect, and especially products that are non-tech, right? This is a domain-centric product aimed for a low resource environment. So yes, there are strong sponsors like Thoughtworks, but it needs to be locally adaptable. It must be locally contextual, usable as such. And the country-wide implementations and country-wide distribution packaging is very important. So for example, in Bahmni allows white labeling, and in Nepal, there is actually a different distribution or a packaging known as the Nepal EHR, which has its own like setup, own integration with their country level national systems. And that's been taken forward by implementers in Nepal who are figuring out their business model. Similarly, in Kenya, Bahmni is known as like e-hospital. And all these cases where it is successful, there is actually local sustenance through local implementers who are figuring out a business model for them. Now, doing this, there is also the technology aspect, especially for ecosystem integration. And when you are doing country level implementations and interoperability using FHIR or HL7 standards is very important. And I would say, think about that interoperability right from the beginning when you're designing like any software. I've spoken about the sustainable, why it is important to have a sustainable business model for implemented ecosystems. And many of us do it through support, upgrades, training. There is also in advanced hospital, fair amount of customization that needs to be done. Like say, for example, oncology. That at the same time, the product also needs a sustainable funding strategy. Collaboration is tough, is hard. We are collaborating with 4 other open source communities. We are collaborating with multiple projects. So having a sustainable funding strategy is an extremely important aspect of an open source domain centric product, I would say. This is a system, healthcare system and hospital information systems that has got dependencies, right? Natural. So for example, it needs to be interoperable with an X-ray machine. It needs to be interoperable with a lab analyzer. Now, these are still inside the facility. Now, healthcare service delivery is becoming more and more collaborative. Many facilities would just do lab sample collection. Actually, the tests get done elsewhere. Doctors are looking for more fit for purpose apps, like a cardiologist would just want to have a cardiologist specific, like, probably a handheld device as such. So both for downstream as well as upstream, as in like upstream, I meant like in a wider integration with the country level ecosystem, is an extremely important decision. And we are working towards it. Bahmni is going to be integrated with the Federated Health Records Architecture of NDHM. Similarly, in other countries, like in Bangladesh, Bahmni integrates with an health information exchange, which is a more of a centralized shared health record approach. Same thing in Africa. Many countries are using OpenHI model, whereas Bahmni is integrated in Lesotho with the OpenHI. Now, this is extremely important because healthcare cannot be stay isolated at a particular facility, especially for chronic diseases. You need to have the continuity of care, and for this, there must be a way to exchange information, leverage information from other facilities. That I pass it over to Gurpreet to talk about the community aspect of Bahmni.
So coming to our last major lesson for today, I wanted to talk about the fact that people, when they mention open source software, they seem to be thinking more about software and code and thinking of, oh, I'm going to get this software as free. But in fact, successful open source softwares are not about the software only. They're actually about the ecosystem around that software. For instance, who are the teams? Who are the partners? What does the documentation look like? Do they have governance structure? Do they have ways for support? Do they have other experts who can actually help answer questions? Do they have an evolution strategy? Do they have a way for others to find new customers? If this strategy around an open source software doesn't exist, then that open source software actually is already dead. It's immature, which means that if someone says, hey, oh, this software is open source and only makes the source code available, for us, we don't see that as open source software, because the ecosystem actually is what makes the software come together. It's the shared knowledge of all of these various entities that is codified as code. And if those entities don't exist, they don't participate, then the open source software doesn't exist. And this is what makes Bahmni, OpenMRS, and such software communities so much more powerful, strong, and long living. And that, I think, is an important aspect to look at whenever we are assessing open source softwares and their maturities. This is an example of Bahmni's talk forum where a lot of people come ask questions. It's like Stack Overflow, the OpenMRS community meeting, which is joint with Bahmni, the blogs that are being written to for by community members on the learnings, the wiki documentation that is constantly being updated with thousands of pages to help people understand how and what to use, best practices, user guide, implementation guide. These are living evidences of a thriving community. And that's really important for good open source software. So in summary, what are some of the lessons that we've looked at? We've looked at the importance of product thinking over project thinking to ensure that we're looking at long-term reusable components that can be adopted over time. We are saying that all products will have software entropy over time. And if you don't design and architect for this, you would get in trouble. Low resource environments can many times be more challenging than enterprise scale because a lot of software today is built for strong and heavy hardware, which is not going to work that easily in places where internet can drop, electricity can drop, memory can go out of whack, or you could have desktops and devices that suddenly fluctuate or have problems there. Also, security and privacy is even more important at scale in such places where we are dealing with large population, where you're trying to ensure that you're building a good user experience for people with less tech know-how and exposure, and still try to maintain something like this. That balance is hard. And things like privacy by design, starting from the start, are all like good ways to keep UX and privacy and security in mind. And no product actually does well if it doesn't choose a good set of aligned customers from the start. Local partners, Anshuman mentioned a lot about local partners, ecosystem development, ensuring that software is not just flung to someone in a hospital, but actually can thrive in the location there, builds around it, people can manage it. And then successful open source needs a good funding model, a sustainable model, and needs a thriving community around it that will ensure that the best practices and learnings are being encoded. And this is not something in a way new. I feel a lot of these things got enshrined in. If you Google for principles for digital development, you would see that these have been, kind of made as guiding principles for software for public good. And a lot of these points there, including design with the user, address privacy, reuse, open standards, interoperability, design for scale, sustainability, these are the points that in a way are hard learnings for the open source and tech for good community.
So to conclude our talk, we think there are three aspects that are extremely important for building socially relevant, impactful, domain-centric products in open source. The first is about empathy. The second is about putting in the hard work, the perspiration. And the third is finding that inspiration that defines not just the product, but also your lives. Thank you all. Thanks for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you.